Good morning. It's good to be with you on this Friday morning as we continue together in our time in Esther. Today we're going to be wrapping up Esther chapter 2. We'll finish chapter 2 and we'll be moving through the story. Esther's got several chapters. It's got about 9 chapters, but it moves, or 10 chapters rather, but it moves pretty quickly. So today we're going to be we talked yesterday about how Esther was now in a position um, to become queen. She relied upon God and upon his and the simplicity of what she was supposed to do. And so today we're going to see some other things that work. Esther's an interesting story because so many things happen that come back into play later. So we've already seen thus far how the king is kind of a hothead, how the king really kind of flies off the handle. Gets a little impulsive, and we're going to see that come into play later. Today we're going to see Mordecai. Yesterday we saw Mordecai worried about his niece. We're going to see um, how we begin to see his importance in the story too. Let's pick up with chapter 2, verse 19 to the end of the chapter, which is only through verse 23. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. But Esther had kept secret her family background and nationality just as Mordecai told her to do, for she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. During the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigtham and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were impaled on poles. All this was recorded in the book of the annals of the presence of the king. So once again, we can see King Xerxes. He kind of flies off the handle. Now that said, they were conspiring to assassinate him, and so he makes sure that won't happen. That won't happen by impaling them upon the poles. So this book is showing us something really important. It's laying the foundation for what is to come later. Because what do we see about King Xerxes? What are we seeing about King Xerxes? He is impulsive. He's angry. He definitely will fly off the handle and will act rashly, shall we say. We see him kicking out Vashti just because she don't want to come to his party. We see him sending out a decree and saying, hey, y'all better be nice to your husbands. I don't know what's going to happen. We see him doing that. Now we see somebody trying to assassinate him, and he impales them upon poles, showing a lesson to everybody else out there. But what I want you to see is the importance of Mordecai. So we see what like so. First, we see the impulsiveness of King Xerxes, but second, Mordecai. Mordecai is looking out for the good of the community and the good of the society, and Mordecai now has done a favor, if you will, to the king. So he goes to Esther and says, "Hey, um, they're going to kill the king." And she goes to the king and says this, and she tells him it's Mordecai. So we see how this is playing out because this is going to be it's going to be very important in the next few chapters when harm is getting ready to come to the Jewish people. That we see that the king is one who will act impulsively and do harsh things. And we see the consequences of going against the king. And we see how Mordecai is unafraid to speak for what is needs to be communicated to the king. So we're seeing all these pieces be put in motion now that are going to be vastly important in the days to come for what is to happen. And these things seem insignificant now, seem like they don't matter now, but they will have great importance in the coming days within this story. And I think it's good for us to know and understand that things that happen now things that happen now might not seem that important. You ever had something happen in your life that didn't seem to be of any importance? And then you look back and realize just how important that was, how a conversation you may have with somebody or somebody may have with you that doesn't seem to be all that significant becomes something of great importance throughout your life. Or maybe an event, maybe a moment, maybe something that you think isn't a big deal. um, becomes a very big deal in times to come. So it's important for us to pay attention, to understand that there are no accidents in God's plan and how God is at work in all things. I love in Romans 8, where it says all things work for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. It doesn't say all things are good. I think that's the mistake we make when we think about how these things work. Romans 8 is not telling us that all things are good. That's not what it says. It doesn't say all things are good. It said all things work for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. All things work for good. So the power of God is that God can bring good out of anything, and that sometimes things that may seem insignificant, things that may seem bad even, can be things that God can use for good, can use for good in our life, can use for good for others' life, and can use for good for the church, for the community, for the world. And sometimes the things that are hard for us, I believe we go through them sometimes just so that we can, as Christians, have a story to share or an example to set with someone else. Sometimes our suffering is not for our benefit, but it's so that we can tell our story to others. Sometimes our victories aren't for our benefit, but it's so that we can share good news with others. One of the things we see over and over again in Jesus' life is that Jesus had compassion for people. I remember one of my favorite stories about Jesus. It says he looked upon them and had compassion, for they were like sheep without a shepherd. Compassion matters. Being there with others matters. Being empathetic matters. And I think sometimes we go through things in our life to teach us so that we can grow and we can learn, so that we can soften our skin, soften our hearts, and be present, fully present with others. Everything works for good. Not that everything is good. I've come to understand that in my life. I've come to see that as a pastor in the lives of others, and it's hard. So I think to hold we have to hold life gently in the palm of our hands, because there are some things that seem unimportant, as we said earlier, like nothing here, nothing we've read thus far. It's out of the ordinary. Kings are always impaling people. That's what they did back then. They impaled people just for boredom. And people are always doing different things. Nothing here seems particularly uncommon in that day. We're going to see how, in just a few chapters, the stories we see now and the way it is all put together is going to be of great importance for the survival of the Jewish people, for the survival of, frankly, God's promise in God's covenant, and for, frankly, our very salvation. So we're going to see that happen. So if things aren't making sense now, if things seem a little confusing, if things seem a little hard to understand, things don't make a lot of sense, things may seem boring, like nothing happening, like it's a waste of time, hold it gently in the palm of your hand. Understand that God is going to use the things you're going through now. God's going to use the experiences you have now. God's going to use all of this. He's going to use all of this in ways that you might not understand, in ways that you may not know, in ways that you may not even mean to know, but he's going to use it. So God's at work in Esther's story. God's at work in Mordecai's story. God's even at work in King Xerxes' story. We're seeing all these pieces put together in a way that in a few chapters and a few verses are going to work to glorify God and show the goodness and the power of God and his provision for his people. So we'll pick up on Monday with Esther chapter 3, and we'll read all that chapter. But I hope you have a great weekend. I hope you have a wonderful, hope you enjoy worship Sunday, that you're able to spend time with those you love. And we'll pick up next week with Esther chapter 3. Thanks for being with us. See you then. Have a great weekend.